You're very warm welcome to Capital Sports 3.0. I'm your co-host, Alan Moore, and we not only have two superb co-hosts straight away with us, then we have an extra special guest coming on a little bit later to discuss one of the biggest stories of this week, and I would say of the last little while as well in boxing, because it's something that we discussed on our show for a long, long time, and we have very, very clear views on how things should be done and run. However, one gentleman decided that, I guess the authorities decided that it's not really too much of a problem if someone who's going in a lethal sport, a sport where people have died and where you could die, that he's going to be juiced to the gills and inflict even greater punishment. But there you go. That is boxing. We're going to kick off in just a second with rugby. Then we're going to speak about, of course, the League Cup final. Of course, we don't have to say too much about it. Manchester United won. And then, of course, Spurs' great win as well. They are climbing their way up the English Premier League to, I think, a healthy third place at this stage, which is great. They would have taken that start season, I really, really believe. They are now the new Arsenal, and Keane is going to be delighted to hear that as well. So before we go any further, Keane, are Spurs the new Arsenal?
I'm very aware that there's a Spurs fan that could reach across the screen and grab me by the throat, but we'll wait till the end of the season. I think their performance today was absolutely terrific. I know Chelsea are in an utter mess at the moment. The only thing that seems to be going right for Chelsea at the moment is the checkbook doesn't seem to be bouncing. So, but I suppose another strong performance. I know they're doing it at the moment without Conte, so it's another big step forward for them. If they can keep those positive performances, they can climb to the dizzy heights of third, and they might even encroach on second place with a couple of weeks left in the season. You wouldn't know if the positive performances continued.
There you go. I mean, it is. I mean, they're a game extra. They're a game extra player than Man United, for example, who are in third place. But at the same time, I think United, they have that their season has now peaked, I believe. As we've mentioned before, they're doing so well off the field. I mean, I should say so badly off the field. So on the field and badly off the field. But they are actually, and one thing, the Glazers have done everything right. They've basically, I think they've done the right thing. They seem to, even I would have slammed Red Bull Ralph quite a bit. At the same time, he seems to have gotten his right man, and now the team are going ahead. Easel, just on Spurs alone, do Spurs have the quality to catch up to third place? Because it was a good performance today. Harry Kane on the score sheet. And regardless of what, you can only beat what you put in front of you. And Chelsea are still a good side.
Yeah, I suppose when we start off by saying are Spurs the new Arsenal, we have to ask, is Graham Potter the new Thomas Tuchel in that club? Like, is he the next man out the door? And I think it was uncomfortable viewing at points. If you were a neutral fan today, you're looking at it going, like, what? If you have that much money and you have that many really good players, what else can you do? From a Spurs perspective, God, I don't want to say that we need to keep Conte away, that he might actually be a bad luck charm, but I'm nearly at that stage. Spurs just, the whole way through today, they just looked like a different side again. They were extremely confident going forward. Their defence was even quite decent. In patches, there were moments when you thought, oh God, Chelsea are coming back into this. But I worry that the fact that Spurs have no consistency is a huge issue. And no matter what way you look at it, Spurs go from highs to lows throughout the season in a way that, like, the same players are playing. It's not like they have a huge depth of squad that they're rotating them in and out. Richarlison, obviously, I think that's a player that we need to now consider. Why was he out of the team for such an extended period when clearly he makes a huge impact? But as a side today, they looked really, really strong. And I think before I go getting lofty ambitions towards a guaranteed third or the dizzying heights of second, I think we need to also factor in the Chelsea they were up against today. And they just seem like a team in disarray, which is, you can only play what's in front of you, as was said. And I think that's important. And it's not about the quality of the Chelsea players. I think it's about the psychological state of that team.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I mean, if you look at it overall, Chelsea had more possession, they had more shots, more accurate passes, but you'd be happy to give up possession, basically at 60% possession almost, give them the ball, because even though they were getting shots, not mind them were on target. And, you could see as well, I mean, I think everyone knows, Graham Potter and his family have been receiving death threats.
Yeah.
Nothing is worth it in the sport. Nothing is worth it in the sport. I mean, that to me, I don't consider the people who do that, they're not fans. in any way, shape, or form. They're basically just the lowest of the low. And people who do that, it's embarrassing for the club. Keane, I will come back to you in 1 second. Isa, another question on the same thing. Keane, in this, I mean, Arsenal, of course, still striding away on top of the league. Liverpool really shunting around the place, drawing 0-0 yesterday because of Palace. Klopp said straight away, "Oh, we need to open a checkbook in the summer." There's a very good likelihood he won't be there in the summer.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And there was another thing I spotted. I had actually forgotten it, that he did sign a contract extension, until 2026. So as you point out, will he be there to oversee the work that needs to be done to overhaul the squad, the work that probably should have been done in the last 2 seasons? Now we know with COVID and all the rest of it, I'm sure there was different things at play and different factors as to why they didn't go looking to get rid of some of the players that they're now hoping to get rid of, the likes of Naby Keita, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, etc. At the end of this season, it will be interesting to see, number one, as you point out, will Jurgen Klopp be there to do the overhaul? And number two, if he was to be let go at the end of the season, who would come in and who would oversee what is a serious overhaul of particularly the Liverpool midfield, and they may need to probably sign a backup goalkeeper as well.
Yeah, the starting 3 yesterday were the starting 3 5 years ago. Arthur is listening to us. He's outside Mass, so he's like listened to us and said it like death threats don't bother him. So there you go. Isolt, on that, just in terms of with Liverpool, I mean, some serious issues with outside the club as well. This week there was a rumor going around that some Saudis were in to try and buy Liverpool. And I heard a very, very good, actually on BBC, I think it's BBC Radio Liverpool. I'm also at BBC Liverpool, not another regional station. And they basically said it'd be great for the club if they got in such a huge amount of money, because the Saudis apparently were looking to buy the club and put in around $1 billion.
Well, look, at some point we're just going to forget about the Premier League and it's just going to be the Saudi League in the UK. Because that's what we're going to get to. I suppose you also have to go, it's great when people are saying how the Saudis are going to come in and spend X amount of money and what it's going to change. We've just had a cup final between Manchester United, owned currently by the majority shareholders being the Glazers, and Saudi-owned Newcastle, and Man United came out on top, which I think maybe goes to show that, like, whatever money and whatever deep pockets are coming in from the Middle East, they're not going to be making radical changes in one season, because let's face it, that's what the football fair play rules will basically dictate. So there's only financial fair play means you can only put in a certain amount in one go. Yes, you are going to be able to grow the club. Yes, you're going to be able to look at buying in different players. You can bring in better managers. But I think the suggestion that just by having the Saudis come in the door, things are going to instantly change is a short-sighted kind of view, because by the same token, we're talking about Chelsea 2 minutes ago. Chelsea have had, as Keane has rightly pointed out, a checkbook that hasn't been bouncing. They have been spending away to their heart's content, but the essence of like a decent team is about less than just spending. Like, there's a lot more to it, and I think Liverpool could see new owners as a quick fix in the same way that for a considerable period United have been calling for new owners because they see it will be a fix for the club. But the reality is, it's about what's going on in the changing room. It's about how the players perform. Yes, you can spend a fortune on different players and bring them in, but it may not necessarily work as a team dynamic. And I suppose the one example I would give about this in a different sport is in French rugby. You had certain clubs who bought in the best of the best players from all the other countries, and they were like, everyone wants to go to France because you're getting huge money, whether it be at Toulon, Toulouse, like it, Montpellier in particular actually as well, but they had huge checkbooks, but they were just buying the best players, and it didn't necessarily initially give them a cohesive squad, because just because you have the best players doesn't mean you have the best team. And I just think at this stage, what's going on in Liverpool, similar to Chelsea, is going to be less about what money they have coming in. They need an entirely new midfield. Like, there's a limit on how much you can spend.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've gone on my party political speech there for my dislike.
No. I think you're right on this one. There is a kind of actually Radio Merseyside. Thank you, that's what it was. Radio Merseyside. On that, well, I was going to say that I was always told as a child, I think my granddad told me actually, never buy trousers from France. Do you know why?
Those French horse people that come over for the Kerrygold.
No, actually, no. No.
They're
Far more
dodgy.
simple. This is a granddad joke. It's because your trousers, if you get trousers from France, they'll always be too long and too loose.
I like it.
Sorry.
That's
You're
a
waiting all
rough
day
quality.
to say that.
I know, God, there you go. This is from my childhood. Really miss my childhood. Okay, and on that note, on rugby, of course, moving on, and of course, there was the Six Nations were back in action today after a week's break. Ireland nipped past Italy 34-20 in Rome yesterday. I'll talk about that in just a moment. England damaged Wales even further 2010, which was a decent match. It was boring in parts of what I found it quite exciting in parts. Today was an exciting match as well with 2 red cards early on in the first half. France beating Scotland 32-21. Scotland in many ways throwing the match away, but also same could be said with Italy yesterday, Keane. They had the beating of Ireland and just didn't do it.
Yeah, they had. No question of that. They had one particular chance, I think, with about 15 minutes left, and Ignacio Brex, for some inconspicuous reason, instead of a 2-man overlap, he decided to chip the ball ahead, and the man on the furthest out was a second row, and Canone just couldn't get his hands to the ball. The ball bounced out of play, and Ireland managed to survive that. They survived an intercept try right on half time as well from Pierre Bruno. But I think the one thing the last 3 weekends has shown from an Irish perspective is one thing we've harped on about before the 2015 World Cup, the 2019 World Cup, is player depth. And they're getting a serious test that way over the last 3 weekends in particular. There's an injury to Finlay Bealham now as well. How severe that is, I'm not actually sure at the moment, but that'll cause issues over the next 2 weekends, I'm sure, or 2 weeks, I'm sure. There'll be other tight heads brought in. Tom O'Toole played remarkably well for an extended period yesterday. But getting back to the game, Italy again, I suppose, like we've always said for the last 23 years, so near and yet so far. Yes, they had a glorious chance yesterday to do one over on Ireland like they did in 2013, but it wasn't to be another anniversary for them like they did in 2013. They just didn't have that extra little bit yesterday, where Ireland looked a far more cohesive side yesterday particularly. And as I say, the injuries that they've had have probably been a backwards compliment and a backwards benefit, that they've been forced into bringing players in and giving them full games rather than the obligatory 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the end of matches that they had been doing previously.
Alan, you are
unfortunately is on mute.
It'd have to happen at least once.
Yeah, I had to do it once a week. Well, I was going to say was that, of course, Italy started off with a very good performance going down 29-24 at home against France, which, look at that French team, they gave it to Ireland, they really gave Scotland today. So that was a very, very good result. Again, we always said that Italy start off very well. They come in with full confidence, they really go for it, and then they get weaker as the tournament goes on. They haven't really done that. They did well again yesterday. However, at the same time, then they didn't get blown up by England. They lost 34-14 against an English side that is lacking just a little bit as well. Isolt, on that, Ireland starting without Jonathan Sexton yesterday, did that make a bit of a difference? Because Ross Byrne, his replacement, did miss a couple of early kicks and didn't look all that steady as well.
No, I would almost go the other thing. I think I'd go the other way. I thought it was good to see Ross Byrne finally start a Six Nations, and I also think Ross Byrne overall, he needs those games. That game time is invaluable for him to build his confidence as the number 10, because it's a hugely confidence-based role. I thought it was good to see the variety of Irish players who came in. I know, obviously, Keane has mentioned Finlay Bealham's injury, but we do have Dan Sheehan coming back. Gary Ringrose was also out yesterday, which I think really did change the dynamic, because we essentially had 2 12s with one playing at 13, which is, it does change the dynamic for the team. And they will be coming back for the last 2 games, hopefully, based on what we've heard. So that's obviously a big boost. I also think that when push came to shove, it's good to see players get a run out and new players come in. But it was good to also see that we were able to bring on Conor Murray, who obviously has had a very difficult few weeks off the field with, obviously his father was involved in a very bad accident. But it was good to see him come on and just kind of steady the ship. And that is really important, to have those experienced players, to have the likes of Peter O'Mahony who can come in when you're up against an Italian side who are hugely hungry for a victory. And also an Italian side which, the night before, so on Friday night, the under-20s played, and the Italian under-20s gave Ireland a serious game, which is really important because it would be very easy as Italian supporters or as Italian players to kind of take the last number of years and go, we're always the nearly men, and to really find it difficult to push on with the game. And when you see they're under 20s, you can see that isn't the case. They are really developing the game at that level and that age, and that will all start to come through more and more. I also think that this year we could be looking at the Six Nations where I would expect them to have the beating of Wales. And I think depending on how the next, like they obviously have Wales at home as their next game, depending on how Ireland-Scotland goes, it could be interesting to see what sort of if Scotland's Six Nations is effectively done post the Irish game, if they've suffered another loss, you don't know what sort of Scottish team will head out, and they can also be a very, if the heads are down team. So it could be a good strong finish for Italy, which I think would be really, really important, not just for Italian rugby, but for the development of the Six Nations as a tournament, because we've got to the stage now where we want to see Italy do well, because that matters in the game. I also just, I think when you see their under 20s, it is a really, like, it's a good sign that they are still bringing players through and that they haven't gone, right, look, rugby, not for us, guys.
Something that I do want to pick up on this, and I'll ask you both the same question on it. There's always been this very, very difficult question about promotion relegation. And this is basically just like franchise rugby in every sense of the word. We saw it when the down under converted into Four Nations with Argentina coming in. That has brought Argentina on leaps and bounds. But Argentina, even though it is soccer country, they are very, very athletic, and same with Italy as well. Back in 2010, I've spoken this before in the show. Back in 2010, as it was then, I think it's now European Rugby, FIRA AERs was then the Association of European Rugby. There was a meeting in Malta. I attended it, and I was representing Malta. I met friends from former colleagues and friends from Croatia, and one of the motions put forward to discuss the point was that it was basically handed to them that if Europe said, we want to build a relegation promotional model, which they had been doing for Europe anyway, towards World Cups, every single country who was there, Wales, Ireland, Croatia, Malta, every single country voted yes, that they were bringing forward. But one country voted no, and that's the country who had actually a veto. So like in the UN, if they say no, the motion drops. Have a guess who that country was?
England.
Am I going to guess Italy?
England.
I was going to go with England, and I'm like, let's not go with the typical aggressors.
Exactly. This is what we were thinking, like, that as one of the English guys said to me straight away, and he said we will never be relegated, so we've no worries about that. He said, but we don't want to dilute the quality because the way that they were proposing it. Now, what he actually made sense. He said it can't be an annual relegation promotion. He said that doesn't do rugby any good. No. And I said, okay, how does it work then? And they had counter proposed that there would be a 2-year cycle to promote. So, for example, Georgia would be promoted into the Six Nations, and they would be there for 2 years. Then they would go down, but they would already have the money and the experience and the kind of brand recognition to try and drive things forward. It made sense, but at the same time, I'll ask you first, Lisa, because you're making the faces about it. What do you think? Do you think there should be promotion relegation? And everyone else, even Ireland, the Irish rep said, look, we could be relegated, but we have to take that chance to grow rugby.
So part of me, I suppose I do like the model where you're explaining where you have a 2-year cycle as an idea. That would be better. But the problem is then you're basically it'd be like relegating Saracens down to a lower division, because they'd always pop straight back up because the level has increased. So even though you're the whipping boy at Six Nations or upper tier level, when you go back down, it's not like Premiership and Championship in football, because with something like rugby, the development of your squad, the development of the physical capabilities of your players from being up at that higher level training and coming up against those, when I say bigger, I mean figuratively and probably physically bigger teams. What that brings you on in rugby, when you go back down, you're likely to bounce straight back up. So essentially, it's almost like if you were Italy, you'd be going down to the lower league and coming straight back up. And I don't know if that's necessarily as positive for the game. What I would think could potentially work, because I think you see it is happening with Italian clubs and various clubs within other tournaments, is if you were to do, not rather than a tiered system, have pools of competition. So while you're playing against the bigger teams and you may be losing to the equivalent of Leinster in your pool group, so for argument's sake, we'll say that's Ireland in your international group, you may be going, and if you're Georgia, one of the other teams in your group might happen to be Italy. So you're having that really good contest at that level, but you're also getting to see what it's like to be up at the top tier against those top level teams. So they may end up going through to the final of a competition, but you're still getting that match time experience, and you're also getting bigger audiences. So as a Dragons rugby fan, I can say that, like, Dragons play Leinster and we're not expecting to win, but those games do bring you on. Even losing, even the heavy defeats, like as someone who's watched that over the years, our defeats are now becoming, the gap is narrowing in terms of the scoreboard, not in terms of the quality, because I think you're playing those better teams. And I think I wouldn't like the idea of where you have a team bouncing up and down, essentially, because no other team is getting that opportunity as well. I do understand the thing about year in, year out. That doesn't give, because rugby has such a shorter season than football, and you'd have so many fewer games in a competition like the Six Nations or whatever you might call it at that stage. Like, getting 5 matches and then bouncing back down in a year doesn't really give you the opportunity to develop fully. But I think there could definitely be an aspect where if you were to look at pooled tournaments where you've mixed abilities within that tier, it would give an opportunity to teams to even get bigger audiences watching their games, which also has a revenue impact.
This whole thing, and while I understood why, like at first, most of the European nations, Croatia, for example, were furious over it. They were like the English scumbags and so on. I was like, okay, hold on.
That's always an attitude you can have.
Yeah. So they were very upset about it simply because they felt it wasn't fair and was disrespectful to them. However, at the same time, as you said, it does make sense. If there was, for example, 8 teams at the top table, Pool A, Pool B, the top 2 teams in each pool went into a semi-final and a final. The bottom 4 teams the same way. You would do like a repechage. Cian, is there a solution? Would it be worthwhile having a promotion system? And how do you envision it working?
I don't know, to be brutally honest. Yeah, this promotion relegation argument has happened particularly over the last probably 10 to 12 to 13 years. And nobody has come up with a concrete solution. The Six Nations, they don't want the revenue tap to turn off all of a sudden. That's a big thing, and it's particularly there to hear that England were the people that put the big red X on this back in 2010 is no great surprise, given that they've done it in the last couple of years with other things. Scotland have done it as well. So it's definitely something that they have to look into. If they even went and put our provincial A teams into a competition with some of these national sides, and where they for promotion relegation, and see would that go away from the Six Nations, leave the Six Nations alone if they want to do that, and put our A teams, Leinster, Munster, Ulster, Connacht, and other A teams into a competition with some of these countries and see how they get on. Because I have seen some of these European fixtures, European Cup competitions that we'll say Portugal, Spain, all that. It's incredibly exciting rugby. There's no difference between that and the Six Nations. So it's definitely something that has to be looked at in the future. What shape it's going to take or what form it's going to take is the big question, and it's going to take an awful lot of toing and froing, which the six teams involved currently obviously don't want to talk about it at the moment. I know Wales in particular have their own issues to try and sort out before they can even dream of trying to put an extended competition together in the future.
It's always the same about dilution of talent and dilution of quality and so on. But they said the same thing with, for example, NHL ice hockey. And there was the original teams, and then they grew. And every single when I lived in Canada, and I heard the Canadians saying, it's such a team. Tampa Bay are useless, Tampa Bay are bad. Suddenly Tampa Bay created a franchise. We had the same in basketball. Golden State Warriors couldn't knock snow off a rope. suddenly they became a franchise, same with Cleveland. So there is that. It takes a while to develop, but this is not as much as rugby does get in players, and we see all these foreign players playing for Ireland and Scotland and Wales and England and so on, and France. This is not quite the same. This is a national team, so we're not able to buy in players to strengthen up. So it isn't quite a franchise model. But then at the same time, we could actually bring it back because, for example, speaking on Friday, was down at a rugby tournament, youth rugby tournament, a kids rugby tournament down in Vladimir. It was a snow rugby, so playing on snow. Lots of fun. It was a lot better than the snow that I played on a few weeks ago that tore my knees up. But speaking about 2 years ago and even last year, it comes on. And there's more parents, more teams. A club that couldn't field a youth team now has 3 youth teams at different levels. So it does develop. Before we move on to the next topic, Keane, I'll come back to you with this one. For the World Cup, it's coming, of course, later this year in France. France going for it. They really want to try and, they want to recover from that shock loss. They didn't expect to lose to Ireland, especially after being champions last year. Can we expect, for example, we've got a week's break. So can we expect, Ireland to hang on to get past Scotland, or are Ireland, they have depth, but are they going to really progress towards the World Cup? Is this going to be another kind of case of flattering to deceive?
Oh God, I hope not. Because I'm pig sick of it at this stage. Absolutely sick of it. So I would hope, and the signs are very, very good at the moment. Now that's the case of death. They'll probably go and the train will come straight off the tracks now, 2 weeks time. It has done before in Murrayfield, so it could again. But in all seriousness, I would be very, very hopeful that Andy Farrell has learned the lessons of that build up to the 2019 World Cup. I would be very, very hopeful that what we've seen, particularly over the last 3 weekends, as I said earlier on, players being injured, other players being asked to step up, and they're stepping in and playing very, very well, all fitting in seamlessly, all doing the same thing, all singing off the same hymn sheet. So I'm just extremely hopeful. As I said, I've probably given it the kiss of death already, but extremely hopeful that the lessons have been learned. And this year, with the fingers crossed, hopefully the 2023 World Cup doesn't come to a crashing halt like other campaigns have in the past.
Isla, before we move on to the next topic, because I'm also aware you're constrained by time as well, so I want to get to the next topic and to get our next guest in as well. Tom Tierney, the former Irish player, passed away age 46. Now, both of you, of course, are Munster people, so I'll release on this. How sort of shocked were the Munster family with this? I know you're a Welsh rugby fan, but how shocked were the Munster family?
I think it was even evident from a lot of the players on their own personal Instagrams over the last 2 to 3 days, just coming out with there was a level of shock for a man in his 40s to pass away so suddenly. A man with 2 young children and a wife who obviously passed away, unfortunately, during the course of a night in his sleep. But it just, as an entire rugby community, I think it was devastating. And I think the influence he had, not just on when he was involved with Munster and various teams in Limerick, but also when he went into the women's rugby setup, was huge. And this is a hugely respected figure. And I suppose Munster rugby has obviously in recent memory been touched by the tragic passing of Axel Foley. And I think there is, to an extent, a lot of the players would be in a similar vintage where they would all have a close connection here as well. And it's a opening of an old wound that perhaps for a lot of players, it's been a very difficult few weeks, especially for, I suppose we have to mention it, the Munster players within the Irish camp, because obviously while Conor Murray, it was his father who was involved in a very severe car accident he was a cyclist and struck by a lorry. Those are all players who are also part of the same team and family in a lot of, I suppose, in rugby clubs in particular, there's a huge family dynamic in the club. So for a lot of those players, they would be very familiar with Conor's dad as well. So I think it's been a tough emotional few weeks for the players involved, particularly from the Munster camp within the Irish setup. And I think the players, obviously they wore armbands during the game, and it's another sad blow to Munster rugby to see a young man in his prime passing away so tragically, and it's obviously very tough for the province and the rugby community within that.
of course, he's from Limerick, but he passed away in Tipperary, I believe.
But he was, as I mentioned, quite upsettingly at home in the company of his family over the course of the night. So, but a very young man, and I think that the thing we have to take here is it's tragic for the family. He's been hugely involved with Irish rugby as a whole, not just in Munster, obviously the women's setup as well, but the international women's setup. Just a young man cut down, and I suppose we all are doing the maths now on how near we are to his own age, and I actually thought he was older, not by much. I thought he was 3 years older, and it sounds silly, but the 3 years when you take it off, you suddenly go, oh my God, that's a very young man and with a very young family. And I do think we also have to factor in that in a lot of ways, Munster rugby in particular, and I suppose Irish rugby, there is a sense of a lot of people. It's a very almost like GA in the sense it's so community built that it is a huge blow, and just a very sad time for those involved in the setups with him. I know Craig Casey in particular has a very lovely post up online, and obviously felt very affected. He would have dealt with them at underage squads as well. It shows how difficult it is for them, and it shows the strength of character for players who have obviously heard such upsetting news before going into a match to go out and perform. Particularly for the younger players within the Irish setup, the likes of Craig Casey, who was a big occasion for him as well yesterday.
Keane, again, you're down to Munster at the moment. I mean, it was a shock. I mean, I saw questions correctly asked. We've got two young Munster men. Now, he of course went across and played in England for a while as well. He had great stories in from there to here. The Brendan Fanning book about his the start of professional rugby, basically. The questions being asked about damage and what they might have taken, and the if there were brain trauma and so on. How are the people taking it down in Munster involved?
It's heartbreaking. I was actually in touch with a couple of the Irish women that would have been players under Tom, particularly in 2017, 2014, 2015, 2016, and they're absolutely heartbroken because he was a decent person. Take away the coaching side of things and other bits and pieces, he was just a decent person, a very fun-loving person is what we've heard from guys that played with him, and a fun-loving person is what we've heard from the ladies that he would have coached, some of the lads he would have coached. As you say, he played with Leicester Tigers, played with Munster, played with Connacht, and spent most of his adult life, if not all of his adult life, involved in professional rugby. But it's absolutely heartbreaking because that's the second member of a team that myself and Isolde would have grown up watching passing away in a relatively short space of time. So it's just absolutely heartbreaking.
Yes, worried to see how many more are going to pass as well, because it is that, again, that period in rugby, the changeover from amateur to professional, they started amateur, became professional. Again, and this is not related to Tom Tierney or to Axel Foley or anyone like that. This is basically a lot of what went on. We saw a lot of rugby players dying very young because of what they were taking to sort of, to
up the level.
Yeah, and even if they're not, and I will say this, if it's not, for example, PEDs, it was, and I've spoken with players who I went to university with in UCD, who played for Leinster and a couple went on to play for Ireland. They never basically had a day off because they didn't know how to be professional. They didn't know how to be professional, and they were carrying injuries, carrying knocks. They were self-medicating, not with alcohol, as I would assume it was, but they were basically taking a handful of painkillers to try and sleep at night because they were in bits. And so many guys enough met from Munster rugby that their bodies are giving up on them. And I do believe that maybe the IRFU need to act now, because a lot of players in that age group, like say 40, well now a little bit older, 40 up to 60, who came through that sort of changeover. And I do think we need to sort of look out for them, because Ireland was England as well, Wales and Scotland as well, but Ireland were way behind the curve on that. And unfortunately, I think there's a time bomb ticking very, very quickly. And again, this is just basically the changeover from amateur to professional. These guys didn't know what they were doing, and they were literally breaking their bodies. And that's my opinion. So that's I'll take away on that. I'll leave it. Not going to insult Munster fans. Okay, Isolde?
Yeah, we're not going to be getting too upset by anything.
No, okay. All right, so we are going to go to a break really quick and coming back and talking boxing of all things. So just back in one moment. Okay, and we're back and welcoming back onto Capital Sports Richard Boxon, all the way from England. Rich, a very warm welcome back onto the show. How's the weather where you are at the moment?
Freezing.
Okay.
I can't put it any more diplomatically than that. It is freezing.
You know, I heard this. I'll. You're wearing a t-shirt, same as myself, so I won't ask questions.
Do you know why I've got a t-shirt? Do you want to know why I've got a t-shirt on, Alan? Because
No.
I just took off my hoodie. I'm
I
that
actually
cold.
saw-
I was like, oh God, I can't wear that. I didn't realise it was a video call, so I've just took it off.
All right, well that's fair enough. Because I was going to say during the match today, it was broadcast via a Russian site, but during the break it was in English, so you hear the adverts. It was on ITV, and it was brilliant to listen to because they had an advert telling people turn down your central heating by 1 degree. Don't run water for more. And I was like, what? I was like, for you can save £350. I think it was a year if you do not go.
Yeah, you might freeze to death, but that 350 quid will serve you well in heaven.
I'm sorry, this has got a very strange direction now already, but maybe this is why Conor Ben had all the eggs to produce methane. But the strange thing is that I was speaking with friends of mine who have elderly relatives in Ireland, and sorry, elderly, but people where they
Did you just call your mother elderly?
No, I didn't. Thank God.
Alan.
I almost did.
She'll get on the plane over there to go smack you.
Yeah, exactly. So when I see this, like elderly people turning down 2-3 degrees the heating because they're worried, but that then opens up more issues towards health and so on. I don't know. Sorry, that's an aside, just something that you mentioned, but okay, we've gone to proper sport at the moment. And the reason that Rich is on, of course, Iseult is hanging on by her fingernails, is because of this. And this, of course, is Conor Ben. Failed a doping test, but he failed it not because he had contaminated this around it, but he had too many eggs. Rich, I'm going to start off with you on this. Can you just give us some background? We discussed the case, but give us some background to the case and why we are where we are right now.
Honestly, Alan, I don't even really know where you start with it. I don't know where it's finishing, and I don't know where you start. I mean, obviously, it began with a failed test last year, and then a second failed test, and then somehow the story came out. I mean, I've seen Eddie Hearn saying somebody from the board leaked it. The story came out that he'd got a failed test, which was obviously everything went up in the air. The show were called off at 2 or 3 days' notice. You know, Eddie and Conor have been very vociferous in their defence that none of it's true. They've got together a 270-page report which they put into the WBC. Although me personally, I don't know what the WBC have got to do with anything really in the grand scheme of things, but that's the route that they went. They put that into the WBC, and as we saw this week, there's been a WBC. Do you want to call it a ruling? I don't know what it is really, but that's what they've done. Saying, I mean, to me that report's a disaster for Ben and Hearn because it doesn't exonerate him in any way. They've obviously gone after the testing process with VADA, which were always going to be a long shot because for a few reasons. One, you're asking the WBC to throw their doping partner under the bus. Two, if VADA are proven not to be able to take samples correctly, then obviously everybody was being not banned by them, but being caught out by them over the last however many years are all going to go flying back into them and appealing. And thirdly, you know, in Britain, and you know, we all say it in boxing, and you know, Eddie's being as loud as anybody, VADA's the gold standard of testing. So how do you suddenly then decide that they're not the gold standard of testing? I don't know. So that's kind of where we are now with it. Really, it really does get some getting your head round.
Iseult, as Rich said, I mean, it's been confused. We've covered on the show, we've discussed on the show, tried to make sense of it. A lot of stuff smelled off it. We've had, of course, Margaret Goodman from VADA on the show as before. Had great conversations with her and very, very open what she does and how they run things. And actually, even though I had some questions that I questioned some of what they're doing and who they're involved with, but she was very straight down the line. You saw some issues in as a lawyer about what was put into the case, what was put into for the defence, Cecil.
So I suppose I would talk from both two perspectives. There's obviously two types of cases, if we view it this way. Not in this instance, but in law terms. You have civil cases and you have criminal cases. In civil cases, if you are offering submissions in a case, whether it be a defence or an explanation, what you do is you do the belts and braces approach, and pardon the pun, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you quite literally say, we have this phrase in law that I detest, but I used to use it a lot. Thankfully, I've moved area. It's in the alternative. So basically, if you're saying in this case that the lab is at fault, you say the lab is at fault. However, in the alternative, and if you find that the lab has actually tested everything perfectly, then the only other plausible explanation we could have here is Conor Benn ingested through some other means, and let me give you all the potential ways he could have done that. So basically, you give every possible defence. So if defence A fails, you move to defence B. And we literally, as lawyers, that is something you are trained to do. You give every possible alternative so that even if it seems remote that the other ones will fail, you still have a backup in there that a party such as the WBC, and as Richard rightly pointed out, I don't know if you call it a ruling so much as it's like basically their carte blanche decision where they're going to go, do you know what, this is fine, everyone look the other way. You give them an option so they can rely on something that you have given them in writing and go, look, A, B, and C don't work, but we're going to buy D. Whereas what seems to have happened here is they went, okay, we've looked at what you've submitted, none of this works for us. We're very happy that VADA, and as Richard again really importantly pointed out, they are the gold standard of testing. The individual doping associations globally do not have the time, money, or resources to put into testing boxers. That is what VADA ensures, because they are funded to go and do this. They are properly funded to ensure that boxing is clean, or where obviously boxing is not clean, but where there's doping happening, they are the party who are there to try and catch it. And that is really important. So the WBC, as much as they will try and come up with a reason to somehow tarnish boxing, irrespective, they could not throw VADA under the bus. So their alternative here was to accept an excuse that wasn't even put out in the first instance. And the other problem with it, I know this has been discussed at length on various shows over the course of the week, and perhaps I can just link it into something we discussed previously. When Shelby Houlihan claimed that she had nandrolone in her system due to a contaminated pork burrito, she went and got the burrito truck, she got the pork, she did all of the things that she needed to do to show that this is how it was contaminated, and still that failed. In this instance, there seems to have been an attitude of, well, Conor, and I'm going to emphasize his surname, Ben, has said this is the reason. Well, he is like boxing royalty to an extent in terms of his surname and his lineage, so how about we just look the other way? And the damage this does to the sport is absolutely immeasurable, because the minute you change what level of proof you need for a doping violation to be accepted, you throw strict liability out the window. And that is so important with doping. It is every athlete in any sport, the onus is on you to keep clean your system. If something is contaminated, you need to prove how it got there and how there was absolutely no fault of yours in it getting there. And even still, you are likely to get a ban. In this instance, the WBC have basically said that they do not care what's in his system or how it got there, as long as he said, it wasn't my fault. There's a plausible reason.
Rich, there is that point, because with VADA, it's the voluntary. So it's basically you agree to submit to it. So basically, you'd be a right idiot to do something if you're being tested. Like, for example, Artur Beterbiev is being tested by, there's a whole range of like top Anthony Yard are all in the system, or in their testing system. Well, we all know that like doping is a very, very advanced science, and you have to be really dumb to be caught. Rich, the question I'm going to ask you: how many clever boxers are there?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But if they're not that clever or they're not clever enough, they'll go out and find somebody who is. I mean, I think if we, you can get really complicated looking at this case, but let's have a look at things simply, Alan. As you know, I like cycling and I go out and ride my bike, even today when I was freezing to death. But I'm an old man now. I'm 50 now, so I'm an old man. Alan and Israel, you check me Strava every day, and all of a sudden, like, wow, Richard's in top 5 on Strava in Yorkshire. How's he doing that at 50? Why he's beating everybody? And then you see a couple of pictures on Instagram, and you think, wow, Richard's got really lean. His body's completely different. His body's completely changed. And then after that, you see that I've palled up with a doctor who specialises in private testosterone replacement therapy. And then you look into this doctor, and this doctor does loads of podcasts talking about everybody at Richard's age in cycling's doping. Everybody's doping. It's easy to beat the testers. It's simple. It's easy. And then Richard goes and enters 2 races somewhere in Italy or Spain or wherever where they have a bit of occasional testing, and he fails 2 tests. Would anybody, hand on heart, if I come on this show, Alan, and went, Alan, believe me, mate, please, I wouldn't do it. Sorry, I always pronounce your name right. It's wrong, sorry. And I went, please believe me, honestly, I haven't done it. Ignore that my body's completely changed. Ignore that my performances have gone through the roof. Ignore that my pal, this doctor, has done his best to make himself sound as dodgy as he can possibly sound. Ignore that we've all come off social media. Ignore all that. Oh, and also ignore 2 failed tests. Ignore that. Honestly, don't you believe me? Who would, hand on heart, sit on this screen now and look at me and go, yeah, I think he's telling the truth? Nobody. Alan, you don't have to lie. Nobody would believe it.
Because, of the 4 of us here, I'm the one who sat literally across the table from Gregory Rodchenkov, and him crying and holding my hands and saying, I was set up, I didn't do anything. And I went back to the agency who commissioned me to do a research and an article. I was like, yeah, I spiked the story, I don't like it. I gave him all the materials and I don't like it. Even though I've been told by police, I've been told by coaches that he's as dirty as can be, but he was so convincing at that moment. But you know what? It was fool me once, and that was it. And so I would likely say no, Rick. Sorry, I don't know, but
it's just, if something doesn't look right on every level, then how can it be right? And Izel's just made a really good point. There's a really, even forgetting Conor Benn for a second, forget whether he's innocent or guilty for a second. If we look at the overall behaviour around this case, there's an incredibly dangerous precedent being set, which is we do not care whether you are clean or dirty. We don't care. We're going to find a way to make it happen. Don't matter whether you're juiced at girls, we're not interested. We're going to find a way. Which, you know what, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. But then please don't do any interviews on social media crying about when boxers have got hurt or crying when they've died, because you can't do both. You do one or you do the other. And if UKAD don't do anything in this case, or the boxing board or whoever's got jurisdiction, don't pick it up, because ultimately this all comes down to 2 boring words, as Izel says, as a lawyer: strict liability. It's in his system, and that's that. If they don't do anything on this, then for me, anti-doping, but worldwide you could say, but definitely in Britain, anti-doping is dead in Britain, because you can't have promotional companies saying that promoter, his boxer's dirty, he's been found, he should never box again. I'm talking about sending him to prison. Or my kid, no, he's been in here and he's cried, and oh God, my kid won't do it. It's a complete nonsense. And if nothing happens in this case, whether there's a full listen, even if there's a full and frank investigation by board and UKAD, and they go, do you know what? We don't think he were. Even if that happens, but people feel there has been a proper process, we'll all still suck a lemon, but there's been a process. At the moment, there's been absolutely no process, and we're just being told, well, this is what it is, and accept it. And for that to happen, why would a boxer pay for VADA testing? Why would a boxer, if you could come into your changing room after or before you're going to box and say we want a sample, just say no? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah. Isel, go ahead. Yeah, I'm going to come to Keith, but Isel, jump in.
I would just say, let's not forget as well, at the start of, with COVID, every year blurs into one. So I'm going to say the start of last year, at one stage during the course of last year, obviously prior to these tests. The WBC basically there were 3 boxers, I think, at risk due to the fact that they hadn't signed up to the clean boxing program, and one of the clean boxing program. One of them was Conor Benn, who they were basically saying you haven't signed up yet, and it was kind of treated like, oh, I've signed up now. So I don't want to say that that's indicative, but if you're not the first to sign up, now let's also remember by the same token, there are lots of dirty athletes across various sports who are signed up to various testing programs, and Lance never failed a test kind of thing. But it's a very dangerous precedent for the sport. It's worrying.
Cian, and this is not a flippant aside, being clean or dirty, as Rich said, and it doesn't matter. It almost sounds a little bit like Irish rugby when they were bringing in a former doper from South Africa who was doping as a child. This, it's not just boxing, it's widespread, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an issue, but I suppose with the man you're referring to, Gerbrand Grobler, he served his suspension. Yes, he was found guilty of it in South Africa, widespread schools issue, and probably throughout the clubs in South Africa and all the rest of it. But as people pointed out, he served his suspension. Now, I'm not for 1 minute saying that his doping didn't continue when he did sign up with Ireland or sign up with Munster. There was big question marks when this all broke in the newspapers. It's all very well when the supporters do their own bit of research, and then all of a sudden when some journalist in Ireland breaks the story about Gerbrand Grobler that he was found guilty of this in South Africa at some stage in his past, it's amazing that the whole sky falls in and, oh God, there's an issue with rugby. But it is a problem in Irish rugby. They may not want to talk about it, but it is definitely an issue that Irish rugby has to deal with. It's somewhere along the line, because we do know it has happened in schools rugby. I'm not saying it happens in professional rugby. I can't say that with any degree of certainty. So definitely it's been an issue in schools rugby. So it's definitely probably an issue at professional level, but I couldn't say that with any degree of certainty.
No, we like I'll say that there are major issues, and I think yes, PEDs, but also which are also PEDs are painkillers and pain medicine.
Yeah.
That's a huge issue.
Yes,
I really have an issue with that, especially in football, for example. I just want to say, because he's gone. Well, he says that I do my hair because I look too young. No, it's not. I'm grey. Don't worry. It's as I said, I always say, like, I don't know if I go bald or grey first with the stress, but there we go. That's when we're doing the radio show for all the time.
No, there's just there's a play being put on it, and Isabel will have noticed this, so she's checking everything, Alan, now. There's a big play with words, so you'll hear Eddie Hearn go, oh yeah, but it was only a trace amount. Now, to the man in the street who looks at his phone and don't follow any of it, a trace means not very much. Well, whether you find a gallon of it or a spoonful of it, there's a trace of it. Exactly. And there's a play on words, and there's a play of, well, now VARDA, VARDA don't even have jurisdiction, even though they paid for VARDA. VARDA don't have jurisdiction. It's a trace amount. There's a play on words now that's being used to diminish the fight against doping in boxing, or the importance of anti-doping in boxing. And I just think, like we've just said, it's just a very dangerous thing to do, because, people say this line all the time, Alan, and you've seen it in boxing. Oh, but yes, somebody could get killed. And I always say, how do you know they aren't already been? How do you know somebody ain't been permanently disabled or permanently damaged and killed? How do you know? Because as we all know, being brutally honest, the testers aren't great at catching people anyway. And now we're saying, well, even if they do catch you, don't worry about it. You don't even need to disclose your paperwork, do a full hearing. It's all fine. And I think this play on words that, and Eddie's doing it at the moment, but other promoters have done it. Trace amount, they're not accredited, they've got no jurisdiction, this one's not sanctioned with this board. It's just they're trying to diminish and sweep away the actual facts of what's happening. And once you get to that line where you say, we don't care if they're positive or negative, and if they're glowing positive, we don't care, and we're just going to talk down all the levels so people can't understand it and just push everything through, I just think you've absolutely lost the sport then, because it is just a matter of time before somebody does get killed when it's proven somebody's been doping, without any shadow of doubt. And you look, I would have always backed Chris Eubank 99 times out of 100 to box Conor Benn. But when you saw what state Chris Eubank were in, which I think making the weight was a big thing that lost him that fight with Liam Smith. To get down to that body fat percentage you did for the Conor Ben weigh-in, have 2 or 3 weeks off and then go straight into another weight cut. A sports scientist pal of mine, I would tell you know, you need to rest for, you don't need to rest for 2 or 3 weeks after your body taking your body to that level. You need to rest it for months. I think that were a big part of it. But God forbid he'd have caught Eubank like that, who were down at that low weight and very weak, and then all these 2 doping cases that have come out after, and it had badly damaged Eubank permanently in some way, shape, or form. The sport then, in my opinion, is absolutely finished. No matter how much they like the pay-per-view money and the content, no TV company would touch it. Because how can you, if everybody knew there's 2 positive tests and it's all just being pretended not to be happening, and then somebody gets banjoed permanently, where can you go with it? Where does it go? You know, you wouldn't see a Formula One car, would you? There's a crash and a driver dies, and after do you know what? We had run out of brake pads and we didn't want to say anything, so we just didn't tell them that there were no brake pads on the car. But honestly, don't worry about it. Just keep filming it. It won't happen in any other sport.
I don't want to go into Formula One very briefly, but no, you are correct in that. But I would say that boxing, even though we love boxing, like Jesus, I've been a boxer for 20 years. I love the sport, but at the same time, it'll go on. I can't see it stopping, and I always go back to Andy Lee losing a world title fight against Chavez Jr. and him saying afterwards, and before mentioning it, and afterwards saying, I can't believe it. This guy had to be helped onto the weighing scales, was completely depleted of everything, and got off the scales, and then came in like a demon, and nothing Lee hit him with could stop him. Now, the same guy then, at the same point, went on then to fail tests and be found out to be doing drugs. But then Andy Lee goes off in his coaching career, and look who he starts working with. People who have also had issues with doping. So it's just I just think it's just this like rotten circle. Isel, I'll go to you and we'll just move very quickly on to the next issue because we're running out of time. You have to go away as well. So
I think we need to remember that boxing has had, as you've rightly pointed out, we've had these instances. We've had these moments where, similar to Dillian White and Oscar Rivas, the near miss of whether or not the fight would go ahead 24 hours beforehand that no one seems to be aware of. I think the difficulty with boxing is, and a bit like boxing's links to, you know, we all say, oh, boxing has always had intrinsic links with various criminal aspects or underworld aspects at various stages, over from the mob back in the earlier years in the States to its more recent issues. The difficulty is that there's sort of a perception in boxing that, right, okay, this would be a big flare-up, but the sport just moves on, and it doesn't. It's like Teflon, nothing sticks. It just goes, okay, so we'll continue on, nothing to see here. And the problem is it's a sport with potentially fatal or life-changing consequences. And I think no matter how many times I say this, and I know I went on ad nauseum to the point where you were planning on muting me in and around the time of the Ben Eubank fight, falling out of bed, the fact that what added insult here is that obviously you have fathers who were involved in fights that had life-changing consequences for people when they were clean. The thought that someone who grew up
and the promoters, Isel, and the promoters have done.
But can you imagine growing up in a world where you know what the trauma your dad went through due to that, the result of his fight, and obviously you know that you can understand that the trauma that your opponent's father went through as a result of his fight, where there was life-changing injuries sustained, and you still would potentially go into the ring doping. Like, that's just, it says a lot about the people involved.
I said, Isel, how do you get everybody sat around the table, Eubank the senior, Ben senior, Eddie, who were crying last year over that Patrick Day dying.
Yeah.
The Sauerlands, who recently had one of George Groves' opponent. His name, I can't remember. Sadly, he got badly injured. He had a massive brain injury.
Yeah.
They've all sat around a table, and first thing they've come up with is, let's make him make a weight that we know he can't make. So that's the first thing, and everybody's gone, oh yeah, cool. Even though then after the failed doping tests, of which Eubank knew nothing until it came out, they've all, including the boxers, including everybody, have said, yeah, let's just rock on and keep going. And you just think, how have they all sat around that table who've all been touched by tragedy, death? Eubank Jr. did, Nick Blackwell, don't forget.
Yeah.
They've all still sat there and gone, yeah, let's just carry on. And there's a saying in boxing, I can't stand, oh, yeah, but it's just boxing. Yeah, but maybe it is just boxing, but that don't make it right.
Yeah,
No, exactly.
There is the thing as well. I mean, when last year, no, well, I've said it before, we've discussed it before in the show as well, or 2 years ago now, when I went in, did a heap of research during the COVID break, because we were doing our pause and bits for radio, and it was very, very good because we'd like basically a lot of time free to go research, to speak with people and have drunk Zoom calls with people, especially a person who's working with Liverpool Football Club. And I got all the information from him, wrote about it as carefully as I could, so as not to get anyone in trouble, had run it by the club as well, say, look, can I publish this? If there's something wrong with it, tell me no and I won't do it. And I did it. So after it went on, we understand, okay, doping in football is normal. And I heard back from journalists who I shared information with, they turn around, sure, it's football. Like, what's it matter? Like, no one's going to get killed. And I was thinking, okay, they go up a level and it doesn't really make a difference. And when we talk about, like, for example, cyclists losing weight, and then they're taking painkillers to get on the bike. Rich, what's the really powerful one, the painkiller they take that basically puts you off your head? Tramadol. And taking tramadol, popping them like Smarties.
It's absolutely disgraceful.
There you go. That's Capital Sports done. And you have guys then, you know.
Well, what that does is, Alan, you're pushing yourself beyond the physical limits that your body can do.
And look, there's a certain amount you have to do it. I've done it. Got into the ring with both hands broken, go, okay, I'll be fine. And I didn't take painkillers. It was an amateur show, and I knew what I was kind of at. But at the same time, there is a duty of care. We spoke with this CISO during the week with Valeva, who the young Camilla Valeva, the ice skater, who's now submitted a case. I think to CAS, is that correct?
Yeah, they've all filed appeals. Everyone threw in an appeal from every
So there you
side.
go. This is with this young girl who was underage. She had to take powerful medicine to get herself on the ice. And we said on the air, and we got some right kicks from Russian people and from Russian authorities, except the Russian sport community were, well, yeah, that's fair enough. She is a child. There is pushing the body to an extent, but Jesus Christ, she shouldn't have been on the ice if she's so ill. But she was taking this extremely powerful medicine to get on the ice. Now, if it was legal or not, it doesn't matter. A kid shouldn't be put through that. But this is where we are. And with boxing, when Rich talked about cutting, some people said, what's cutting? They're not quite sure. What, like, that's when you're losing weight. You're dropping off weight. No, the last kilo you're going to lose because you're already quite low. You're way below. You walk around, some of these guys, for example, if they're boxing at 60 kilos, for example, they'll go down to 51 kilos. They lose 9 kilos, and it's done as carefully as possible. But the last bit that they're losing is fluid. So if you're losing fluid, that goes from your whole body, and that includes the brain. So when you're the fluid in your head protects the brain. So if there's not enough fluid there, you're going to get like brain damage, because that is just a simple fact. That is what happens, and we've seen it with many boxers in the past, many athletes in the past. When they're cutting down, it does do damage. Move on just very, very quickly on this. Two small little topics before we go, because these lads are run for a call. And one thing we'll say is Formula One is starting next weekend. The first race is in Bahrain. The next race is in Saudi Arabia. We've got boxing in Saudi Arabia next week as well. We're talking about Saudis coming to buy Liverpool. Saudis who already own Newcastle. Saudis
We've boxing in Saudi Arabia tonight as well. Let's not forget that shit show.
Sorry, I forgot about that as well. I thought it was next weekend. I'm looking forward. So I'm going to start off, Keane. Should we be ultimate snobs over Saudi, or is their money as good as some guys who earn their money from backing BlackRock or arms dealers, or from washing dodgy money to the City of London?
I love the way you come to me without having a clue. No, look, it's going to happen. We've said it about the Winter Olympics in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, Qatar seems to be the destination of choice, no matter the sport, over the last couple of years. It's going to happen. We have it this evening with Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. Where are they boxing? Quelle surprise. They're boxing in Saudi Arabia. So look, it's going to continue to happen. And it at this particular moment, it doesn't matter what the sport is. it's just no matter who's putting the money up, doesn't really matter what colour your money. Fine, I'm going to take it. We'll carry on with the chosen event.
Rich, should that be just the case? Because there is a case a way we say, well, like, we don't like those like bloody. And I heard these bloody like foreigners, these Arabs. We shouldn't be doing this with Russians and so on. But ultimately, money is dirty, and there's going to be coke on rolled up notes. There's going to be blood on diamonds. It doesn't matter where it comes from in the end.
I think you've got to decide where you're going to draw the line on it, haven't you? You can't say, well, their money's not great, but we'll accept that money. But all these people from there, we definitely don't want their money. And it's very difficult. It's a difficult one, Alan, really, because we've had Russian money in football. Some of the early chairmen, I'm sure, weren't the cleanest of clean characters. We now got Saudi money at Sheffield United. We've got a Saudi prince, and sadly, the way he spends money, he must be 757th in line to thrown, because we haven't got any money to spend. So it's not always the golden ticket everybody thinks it is, unfortunately. But I don't know. It's where do you draw the line with it? It's either you can't say this is not them, but yeah they are, but yeah that's okay. It's either it's like that old saying, you can't be half pregnant. Either it's no good for anybody, or it's all right for some. And I think that's where we are with sport. I mean, a really good pal of mine, Don Majeski, an old matchmaker from New York, he has a saying that somebody told him when he was first starting out about boxing. I think you can apply it to sport in general now. And it was, the only crime in boxing is not to make money. And I think you can say that about sport now. The only problem with sport is if you're not making money. And it doesn't matter where that money comes from. Everybody's happy to look the other way, pretend it's not happening. Because ultimately it's just about what we're watching on the TV. Rightly or wrongly, may I add. Rightly or wrongly, that's just where we are.
Yeah, Isel, I mean, you're working in law, and I mean, you and I discussed this at different cases, but and I'm not going to reveal any secrets on it, but it is a case where sometimes, you don't have chances in terms of when clients come in and you have to get the work in. So it is very, very difficult. So basically, sports is the same as life. If someone's going to hand you a lifeline or offer you a richer future, you kind of grab hold of it.
Yeah, and I suppose what we are seeing coming out of the Middle East when they're hosting these huge events is they're pumping money into not just the production of these events, but you're seeing all the, like Ronaldo going to Saudi Arabia, even though he fully thought he was going to South Africa, as I know I've mentioned before, based on his first press conference. But they're also turning these into events where there are huge celebrities ringside tonight. I'm sure we will see the good and the great of not just sports, but we'll see a lot of celebrities full stop. I think what we need to remember here is that we do want to see sports develop globally, but there is that level where we have to remember while we're watching these events that sports washing is literally happening in front of our eyes. And I think the thing is, we discussed this at length when people were complaining about Qatar and the World Cup being there. How often since have we heard people worrying about Qatari rights and human rights in Qatar since? Because it goes, once it's not blatantly on your face and you're being reminded that we need to think about human rights, we suddenly stop. So it obviously is working. Sports washing is happening before our eyes. And I think the important thing is, if we're going to take money from various countries or various people in any sport, what sports need to do is they need to put in or implement some sort of societal benefit to what they're doing. So in football, obviously, the entire idea is that you're meant to have fit and proper persons in charge of teams. You need to make those assessments fit for purpose. With things like, if you're going to have boxing going to Saudi Arabia and you're going to have the likes of Eddie Hearn saying how it's growing the sport out there, and he loves to throw that out and how much it's changed. Well, if you're going to go and take Saudi Arabian money, you should be saying to them, this is what we want to see in terms of, you're not going to change human rights structures in a country, but we want to see X amount going into boxing in the area, or we're going to put X amount back in. You have to do something to counteract the fact that there are queries on the legitimacy of the money. So do something good, give money back, because the reality is money is going to come into sports from wherever money is. It's not going to be checked. We just need to do something to ensure that money that comes into sport has a societal benefit in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think we.
idealistic. But if they are going to say boxing, the numbers do support that boxing in Saudi Arabia has been growing, but you're coming from a very low base. So maybe we need to just see something. So at least when we're paying for our pay-per-views, when we're turning on our various channels to watch promotions, and we're questioning in the back of our head the moral stance of watching these events, that we at least feel something is going back to the benefit of either a local community or the sport.
One drawback, I would say, having spent years in Saudi Arabia with boxing there, of course, that women will be excluded from most gyms or have to have separate gyms completely, which is the same as McDonald's. And the other issue is that for most Saudis, it wouldn't be ideal for them, because like spilling blood is a huge issue for them under Wahhabism. So it is a big issue on that. Last week you were saying you wouldn't care if someone came in, doesn't matter where they're from. If ISIS came into Spurs, you'd like take them in happily. So like you did say that.
Look,
you're going to get your workout.
Look, Spurs are on the up at the moment. We'll still take anyone's money, anyone's at all. We do not want 750th in line to the throne. We want someone in the top 100. We're snobby about our Saudi princes. But look, we'll take anyone's money, please. Just anyone. Come in, give us some extra cash. Like, now that we're doing well, relatively speaking, there's no chance Daniel Levy's giving us even a cent extra this summer.
No. He'll make money from it. Close up the show this evening. I have one situation I want to bring up to everyone, ask your opinions on. This now happened yesterday. This is Wendell. He's a Brazilian player for Zenit St. Petersburg. This is down in, I would say, my hometown in Russia, Ulyanovsk. The biggest day in many a year for Volga Ulyanovsk. This is in the 5th round of the cup. They were playing Zenit St. Petersburg. Volga, of course, they're in the 1st division. This is the homeland. They're called Ulyanovsk because it's named after Vladimir Lenin. He's Vladimir Ulyanov. That is, of course, Ulyanovsk. So basically, he's walking on the pitch after being substituted. Zenit were winning 3-0, and some clown in the crowd threw a banana, as you see here, at his foot, his right foot. He's walking off the field. I was doing commentary on it. I didn't see the incident. Nobody saw the incident. Even another Brazilian player from Volga, I asked him, "Do you see it?" No. I interviewed him after the game. He didn't see it. So it was a really, really strange moment. Volga came right out and said, "This is a disgrace. We're going to get this person. We're going to ban them for life. This is not our club," because, of course, Volga are very much. Ulyanovsk is a mixed city. You've got a whole range of. You've got a Lutheran church. You've got a Catholic church. You've got a number of mosques of different strands, I should say, or groups within Islam. You've got Orthodoxy and so on. And this is a very, very multicultural city out on the Volga. Has always been that way, and continues that way. And the club is the same. You've got Tatars playing alongside Chuvash, Mordvans, Russians, Ukrainians. Everyone is mixed. A lot of people came to the city when they had in the 70s and 80s, when there was huge production plants there. The heavy lifting planes were being produced there. The second longest runway in the world is in Ulyanovsk. So this shocked everybody. The Russian Football Union, the committee who were looking after the cup, as in Volga, Zenit. Every single person came out and made a deal of it, except the players. They said, "No, we'll deal with it." And the players were annoyed and angry. But for someone to do this, start with Eastland on this, someone to do this, to bring a banana to a field, and I've been so often at matches in Ulyanovsk, nobody brings a banana to a football match. This was done for effect. What should the sanction be for the club?
It has to be a very substantial sanction, because it's a very deliberate act. And that's the issue here, as you rightly pointed out. I don't know what you have for sale at stadiums, but I can tell you, if you were to go to any match I can think of in football, rugby, GA here, it isn't you wouldn't be purchasing a banana at the stadium, which suggests someone sitting in their house before they go to a match, or going to a shop before they go into a stadium, and deliberately thinking of that act. Which also, it's not an act of someone yelling something at a player in the course of a game, which is entirely inappropriate and equally disgusting. But it's the malice and forethought to do that is really frightening. And I think you have to come down hard on the club, because that's where you ultimately have to make your mark.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. I mean, everything with the banana. I mean, there was no, and again, covering the match, and I'm very, very attuned to this. Huge applause for the player walking off. great appreciation because, again, there are two colours. The first Nigerian, first Brazilian players ever to play for Volga were playing yesterday in the club. They were so proud of that. They're like, this is us, because it was so important. And there was no monkey chance, no abuse, nothing untoward for the entire match. Everyone was absolute shock. This was sent to me by a photographer right after the match, or during the match, to my phone, because I was commentating on distance. Cian, I mean, the club has to be punished, but what happens to the person who, like, apart from psychological help, what happens to the person?
I suppose on a very, very human level, just an all-out ban from that stadium and other stadiums within Russia as well, if they could go that far. But certainly a ban from that stadium in particular, but a further ban if they could do that.
Rich, to wrap up on this, Isolt had to pop out, or she popped out for a call. To wrap up on this, I mean, Russia never does itself any favors, whether it's doping, whether it's, it doesn't matter what caused the current conflict in Ukraine. They went in. They're still there, still fighting on, and they don't do themselves any favors. But this seemed very, very premeditated and deliberate. Why would someone do that other than to look for attention or to disgrace the club or disgrace Russia?
I think it's not even, you might disagree with me, Alan, but I don't even know if it's a Russian thing, to be honest, because funnily enough, we're having a conversation about this with one of my pals the other day when we were walking home from Sheffield United match. Football stadiums to me now seem to have become a little bit like Twitter, in that people think that once they've gone inside a stadium, they can just act, say, and abuse whoever they want. And there seems to be very little policing or stewarding now where people get kicked out for doing anything. So I just think it's become like a large area where you can go and show off, be as vile as you want, use whatever language you want, use whatever insults you want, say what you want about the players, the officials, whatever. And it's become the norm. It's just become the norm for a lot of people that's what they seem to go for. So, I'm not smart enough to comment on Russia doing itself any favours in Ukraine, but I don't think it's a Russian thing. I think people think once they've paid the however much money and they've gone through the turnstile, that they've got permission to behave however they want to, and they're gonna.
Yeah, there's a huge bit of sense on that. Is that just this misbehaviour, stupidity? Again, I know what goes on in England. I know what goes on in Ireland. I know what goes on in Germany and around the world, or in Italy, for example. We were speaking with Cian about this in Italy before the show started. I'm looking just at the Russian, a team that I loved. I basically almost 20 years following them. I accidentally began following the club, and worked with them, and did promos for them and helped them, but this was heartbreaking. I mean, Cian, I'll ask you, and we'll finish up with Rich, and we'll finish up the show. Cian, in this sense, what can a club do to try and educate people, even though it's kind of like just putting a plaster over a tiny little spot that was created by one gobshite? Sorry.
Absolutely, but I don't think a club should be the ones to educate. I think people around that person should, well, I won't go and say dish out their own brand of justice, but definitely try and call him out for it, call her out for it, whoever threw that particular banana onto the field today. It definitely has to be looked at by other people. I don't think the emphasis has to fall onto the club, because, I mean, you can't control who comes in the turnstiles, as Rich has said. You cannot control who comes in the turnstiles. It's down to yourself. Look, if you're going to do that on a football field, I'd love to see what that particular person is like at work, what that particular person was like at school, what's that particular person like in family life. It's definitely reflective of that person, because I wouldn't even dream of doing something like that. I know the reaction if I even attempted to do something like that here in Ireland. There would be war over it, definitely in my locality anyway.
Rich, same question to you. I mean, people come through the turnstiles, they want to get a bit of attention, they want to make a statement. Before I finished off, back in July in 2011, I was down when Volga beat on penalties, 8-7 on penalties, and the goalkeeper actually scored a winning penalty. They beat Gazvik Orenburg to go through to meet a couple of weeks later Angie Mahachkala, who at the time were on their uppers. They had Roberto Carlos. This is when Angie had money. And they had a lot of money. And Angie went down and beat Volga also 3-0. But this was like, I spoke with, at the time it was Moscow News. I spoke with Moscow News. I said, and Moscow Times. And then they were actually published in paper. And I said to them, with a number of other people as well from Russia today, I said, look, you should go and cover this. This is going to be huge. It's going to be massive. And Ulyanovsk and so on and so forth. Of course, there's pride for myself as well. And the one thing that was said to me by a guy from Moscow News, who's the editor, an English guy, said, well, look, it was going to be some sort of racist incident because Ulyanovsk is such a depressed city, it's so bad. Then we go down with that angle. So they were almost wanting something to break out, to have something to write about. And that's exactly, and I have the email still, this is what they wrote back to me, and I'm like, what? This is insane. But this is what they wanted. They wanted, something that was going to shock people altogether. For me, it was embarrassing because at the time, it was a huge celebration. Even though Volga lost, Roberto Carlos, I have a picture of him, my best friend, my brother, Sergei, because him handing over gifts of Roberto Carlos and Angie still remembered as a club. Should it go in the club or should it be something that we have a greater conversation about?
I don't think you can blame the clubs. How do you blame the club for, every club's got its idiots, whether it's kids who want to go and fight or, like I say, and listen, it's not just that banana could have just as easily been thrown by a woman or a kid. Where I sit in the stand, and even I'm next to a family stand, the stuff you hear coming out from people is just unbelievable. So how do you blame for the club? There's a broad range of society that'll follow a football team. How do you hold the club responsible? Somebody who goes in. What are you going to listen? If the club send out all the stewards to stand at turnstile and give out bananas to fans because there's a black player on opposite team, that's one conversation to have. Yeah, the club are solely responsible. If there's programme notes where the manager's saying to target a black player or a player from a different area or whatever, yeah, then the club's responsible. But this taking Sheffield United, for example, there's 30,000 people there from a broad spectrum of society. How can a club be responsible for what everybody in there does? It's a bit of a nonsense, to be honest. And to me, it's just a little bit of sporting hypocrisy we don't know who to blame, so we'll find club it's somehow their fault. Well, how is it the club's fault?
Yeah, but I agree with you on that. I mean, again, because it was my club, I was ashamed seeing it. I was like, oh no, because this is again the club immediately came out. This is not us. We don't want this. We don't want these people near us. But again, as you said, there's people like that. One reason why I found difficult sometimes when we go to Russian football match, you hear some of the capitals, Spartak like Moscow, for example, just picking them because they heard the fans doing it, where they're targeting other ethnic players, and they'll make these chants. For example, against Czech, like they're playing Akhmat Grozny, and they'll chant to get kind of slow anti-Chechen, like go back to the mountains, go back and shag sheep and so on like that. They go down to Grozny and they get the same back at them for being pigs and so on. But that because they were found around a meat processing plant. So they go, you're pigs, you're meat, blah, blah, blah. So there's this kind of, not very nice, but it's a banter, but at the same time, the level that we saw like that.
Alan, it happens now in England. Sheffield United played Nottingham Forest in playoffs semi-finals last year. And the chants throughout all the game was scab, because obviously Nottingham went back to work, the miners' strike, and they went back to work. And it was vitriolic. It was vitriolic, and it made me laugh on my way out. Like I say, I'm an old man, so I'm walking out with a few of my pals, and some of the fans are squaring up to each other, and this bloke's in this kid's face, you dirty scab, this, that, and other. And kid with totally straight face just went, mate, I'm 21, I weren't even born. But that's what you're dealing with, whether it's about a strike from an event 50 years ago, 30 years ago, whether it's from a war, whether it's from a religion, whether it's from the colour, you're always going to have those people who that's what they go for. They cause chaos in an empty room.
That's it. That's it. And I hate to say it because it's probably not fully true. The growth of social media has made it worse because
I say football stadiums are like Twitter, but in real life, you're actually there. You can say what you want, do what you want, and you can just put it out there and do what you want, and nothing's going to happen from it.
This is what, in hindsight, I do appreciate what Roy Keane did against Crystal Palace. Or sorry, Cantona did, jumping over and kicking a fan. Because fans go in and say, "Oh, I can say whatever I want," and it does. It's like, but you can't target people for this. You can't do this. And there's a funny one with I think Man United this year was they were singing back at Liverpool fans, "Where's your Munich song? Where's your Munich song?" And people on Sky were outraged. Why are Manchester United fans singing that against Liverpool? Because Liverpool fans were singing about like the Munich disaster, and at the same time, Man United fans are singing about Hillsborough. I was like, oh, I give up.
Goes round and round. I had a conversation last year with a pal of mine who was actually at Sheffield United, and one of the players got some racist abuse on Instagram. Really good player, David McGoldrick, is at Derby County, Irish international, and he got some racist abuse on Instagram or something like that. So it all came out on social media and club news, and I spoke to a kid who actually works for an agency, and I went, the way to stop all this is what I do. This is on Planet Poxon. Is that whoever sent that tweet, threw that banana, did whatever at that level, and it's racial harassment or whatever, they should be made to go and sit in a room with the player and his family, whether that family is his wife, his mum and dad, his two little daughters or two little sons at 7-year-old, and say, right, go on then, mate. We're all here together now. Why did you call me a black whatever, or why did you call me a Irish whatever, or why did you go on? Just explain. My mum and dad are here with me, or my girlfriend, or my two little kids. Just talk me through why you did that. If you had to face that level of shame, not being on social media or for the media, if you had to go in a room as a grown adult, now imagine me as a 50-year-old man. I'm to go and sit across from a plane going, one of his kids sat on his knees and his mum and his girlfriend sat outside him going, yeah, well, I did call you this and yeah, I did send you that. And it'd be absolute, to a normal human being, it'd be mortifying. And to me, the only way to do it is to shame people. And I think the best way to shame them is you have to face up for what you've said.
I think that is a brilliant idea, and I've said before, it shows that you get these.
If I ever end up ruling world, Alan, if I take over the world, that's going to be one of the things.
I do that because it basically all the people who are like giving you abuse and like sneering and the whole lot, when then they see these players, I'll say it. I saw it in Russia. I also saw it in Germany. When Tony Yeboah was playing he was playing against Eintracht for Hamburg, the fans held back from all abuse from him, even though he scored an equalising goal against them dying seconds of a match that at the time seemed they were going to send us down. And the fans didn't go at him because they knew him. Now I saw them then against another team, against Borussia Dortmund, and the abuse he gets from the players in the team. And then afterwards, some of the fans, I knew some of the fan club, and I knew that from their section, they were like screaming heaps of dogs abuse of the Borussia players and a couple of the colour players in particular. Afterwards, they come up and were like, oh, can you give autographs? Can you give autographs? And can we take a picture with you? So I was like, yeah. But I Planet Poxon sounds very good to me. And on that note, say thank you very much, Eastland Scott, of course. Rich, Cian, thank you so much for your time.
Tell Eastland she needs to get ready for a Tottenham Hotspur at Sheffield United Wednesday night. She'll have something to be moaning about then.
Yeah, we'll get her back next week. We'll see what she says. So thank you very much, guys, for this evening. And,
no problem.
Look forward to seeing you both soon. And on that note, I will say thank you all for joining us this evening. We have a lot of comments, a lot of viewers as well this evening, a lot to digest and to go out into the new week with as well. So I'm saying on that note, thank you very much for joining us again this evening. Take care of yourselves, and of course, most importantly, take care of each other.